Discussing circular cities on Future Cities Africa, my guest today is Dion Chang. He's the founder of Flux Trends, a business strategist, trend columnist, a keynote speaker, and a professional cage rattler. Dion, welcome. For the one person out there that hasn't heard of you, please can you give us a quick tour of your background and current work?
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And yes, for people who don't know who I am, I'm the founder of Flux Trends. So I've founded this company about 14 years or so ago, but had sort of a different career in media and a completely different world, but focused on media. But that was an easy transition into tracking trends, and that then developed into tracking trends as business strategy. So it's a very specific focus on trends analysis at Flux Trends.
What is your definition of a circular city, and what opportunities do you see for cities in the circular economy?
Okay, so I think I just want to take a step back because I think there's a lot happening in terms of circularity, which is the term that people are pushing around at the moment. And just a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, people didn't know what the term was, and maybe even some at the moment it might still be just surfacing, but it's starting to really impact in very different sectors, specifically in retail. In the retail sector, that's starting to come push really quite aggressively and quite quickly. But in essence, circularity or circular economies is not having to add something into a system. So it is a bit like recycling, but it is recycling 2.0, because you just do not want to add any new components, new products, new whatever it is into that system. So you use whatever is already in that system, and then from there on, just keep it to be as sustainable as possible. So in terms of the cities, now I think that's quite it's quite a big leap for people to do that. I know people are starting to plan smart cities, but I think the currency is kind of, we'll throw the words around of smart cities and everything, but the actual implementation of it is quite another thing. And I think the same stands for the circularity part of it, which is why I wanted to step back a little bit and actually track it from a consumer mindset point of view, because I think you've got an awareness within consumers about, or citizens, about recycling and about the sustainability. And I think what happened in 2020 specifically, the pandemic really kind of not only accelerated trends, which is kind of a commonality that at the moment, but it's also heightened the awareness of sustainability. So while we were in lockdown, a lot of things changed and fundamentally changed. And these are your consumer mindset shifts, which will then eventually scale towards a city, or if people are doing it in a suburb, or they're conscious consumers, then it's going to start scaling up in terms of cities. I really hope that it does scale fast in terms of a city, because just here, I'm based in Joburg, you're just kind of seeing that we need to help your SOEs with electricity, with services, all of those kind of things, so that the faster we can get into a circular system for cities, the better it's going to be for everybody, and as well as managing that city. But like I said, it's a big task. So I'm not rose tinting anything. So for example, again, in my hometown in Johannesburg, the infrastructure is really old. So you end up patching up old infrastructure rather than trying to implement a circular system from the get-go. So you're starting out on a back foot. But that said, I do think there's a lot of potential for that, because it is the way which we need to go with that.
What role do you see cities play in implementing the transition towards a circular economy model?
Well, look, I think it's really fundamental, and I think that is why it is such a challenge. Like I said, I don't want to rose tint things and say, yeah, we're going to snap our fingers and we're going to have a smart city and circularity that's embedded there as well. If you just take the concept of electric cars, which is starting to scale a lot. There's a lot in the sort of geopolitical business world of the race to get to own batteries. The manufacture of batteries. So that's really scaling, and it's giving you an idea of what's to come. But then, jokes aside about Eskom in South Africa and how we're going to get our electricity to charge the cars, It is an infrastructure thing. You've got to really plan spatially. You've got to plan urban dynamics, all of those kind of things to be able to embed that. So we have to have really forward-thinking city planners and are looking to the future and not just trying to keep their heads above water. And therein lies the problem and the conundrum, is because you're just trying to, I think it's within all businesses, just trying to get up to a digitization in terms of business. You are struggling to just keep things operating, and smart city circularity, all of those kind of things is kind of a nice to have on the future. But that future is heading to us very, very quickly, and we need to scale up the kind of the processes to do that.
And how do you think citizens should be activated to participate in the circular economy?
Well, I think that's maybe more of an easier task. I say that carefully, because if I go back to in terms of retail, in terms of consumerism, that has already started to be embedded in that. So if I can just sort of take a step out of the city environment, go into the retail environment, just to illustrate why I think it's going to be easier. You've just take the fast fashion industry, or the ultra fast fashion industry. I believe personally that the back of that was broken in 2020 because people saw the waste, the madness of those fast fashion cycles, how many garments were made, and you don't actually even use those things. So it started to be embedded, and 2018, beginning of 2019. You started to see this move into fast consumer goods. So there's a company or a concept called Loop, and it started at the beginning of 2019, and it was just to deliver your household cleaning products there. And what they did was also, a mammoth task. They spoke to your big companies, your Unilevers, Reckitt Benckises, Procter & Gamble's, all of those suppliers, and say, you can still have your branding, but we want to reduce, not eliminate totally the single-use plastics, but at least the containers will come to you. You use them. Once it's finished, you phone up Loop again, and it's a replenishment model, which is a clever one for the producers, manufacturers of the product. But also it's starting to get into, and that scaled really, really quickly. So just from 2019, into where we are now. It's almost pushed into retail as well. So not here in South Africa yet, but internationally, you're going to start to see Loop products actually on the shelf. So you wouldn't actually even buy it in retail and then put it back into the circular system. Another example is, it's a sort of a big bellwether. At Flux Trends, we use these bellwethers just to sort of say, this signals a tipping point of something. And last year, while we were already in lockdown, H&M in their flagship store in Sweden put in a circular machine. So basically, if you had a garment that you were going to just throw out, you would take it back to them, an H&M garment there. It'd be fed into the machines. It would be completely shredded. The fibers would be shredded, re-knitted, and those fibers then spit out a t-shirt, a scarf, or something that you buy for a reduced cost at the end of that. So a lot of those things are happening. And just one more case study, because I think it's really interesting to, for people to understand the scale of it. So it's a bit of a mouth twister. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So for people who follow these things, there's just this garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean that's caught in these undercurrents, and it's the size of a continent. They've started to harvest that plastic, that waste, and then also repurpose that. And a brand like Adidas is leading with it, and that's also coincidentally called Loop. So everyone's calling everything Loop, but it is about that circularity. And that's why, for me, very long answer to your question, but that's why, for me, I think it's be easier to get citizens on board with that, because it's really starting to be embedded into it. The challenge where we stand now in 2021 is what we're calling closing the green gap. So if you've got your consumers or your citizens aware of it, it is now actually up to the manufacturers and the rest of the supply chain. So what H&M were kind of doing is meeting that challenge. So you're starting to see the responsibility, should we say, move from the consumer up to the big manufacturers and then into supply chains and everything. And then once that happens, then it becomes more scalable and it becomes a lifestyle thing. But at the moment, you've got your citizens or your consumers wanting to do things, and it's not really met with the same sustainable mission that your big brands and things have. So once that happens there, and then the next step will then be scaled to municipalities, and then we'll get the city on a circular grid. Yes.
Talking trends, what are firstly the global and secondly the African trends in circular cities and the circular economy?
All right. So the trends, are started, as I mentioned, in some of the brands and consumables that people are doing. But what's also interesting, which will impact and also add to a circular city concept, is what we at Flux call transient ownership. So if you've ridden an Uber or you had ride sharing, any of those kind of things, you will understand that the transient economy or sharing economy. So what's significant that's happening there is that the rental of clothes is starting to boom. So that was sort of seen as it's vintage, it's secondhand kind of stuff. But the rental market is actually growing faster than the fast fashion cycle. It's not bigger than the fast fashion cycle, but it's significant that the past 3 years that upcycling, recycling, or rental market and big brands are actually putting their inventories onto platforms like Rent the Runway to do that. It's significant because that's also happening in the automotive world. And if we're talking about circular cities and circularity there, you need to understand that we have to embed a sharing economy within a city. So one of the other bellwethers that we use is in Paris. So Paris has got a very vibrant sharing economy in terms of cars. You get sharing electric cars, you just get sharing models, floating car systems, all of those kind of things, not just ride hailing or e-hailing. But what the bellwether for me was, it was really interesting, was in the 70s and 80s on the periphery of Paris. They built these housing estates with these vast basements for parking. And you fast forward 3 decades or so, the sharing economy is so pronounced in Paris that these underground parkings are empty, they're deserted. So the city of Paris actually put out not a tender, competition to say, what do we do with these underground parkings? Because it was sort of becoming drug dens, all of those kind of things. And a group of young upstarts started called Cycloponics. They pitched to grow mushrooms in this dark, dank environment. And they do. So they grow mushrooms and they grow chicory, which the French love. And it has an added benefit. So not only do they have an urban farm underground, but the restaurants and the food markets that they serve can actually say, there's no carbon footprint on this, and these came right from under your feet, literally. And that's when the sharing economy then moves into circularity, and then it starts sort of seamlessly just go into that circular city where services, energy, all of that kind of stuff is then utilized, but in a seamless way. Instead of somebody saying you shouldn't be doing this and pointing fingers and everything like that. For me, the way that has developed and evolved is the way in which we should be approaching it. Obviously, to be nudged. So somebody in the city of Paris said, let's do a competition to say what can we do with those. That was the good nudge, but the solutions were sort of came up and they bubbled up and evolved by themselves, which I think is the way to go.
Density plays quite a big role in enabling a lot of these things that you've mentioned. How quickly do you think we can start implementing that in South Africa? Because we do have more spread out population, not a lot of extremely dense places.
I think that, look, the density, because it happens obviously in urban areas and peri-urban areas. So when people come through, and then especially in South Africa, you've got a lot of informal settlements and that sort of things popping up there. The one thing that I've noticed, it's in a roundabout answer to that, is dealing or trading in trash. So bear with me here, but you're starting to see around the world, and even in a shopping center like Sandton City, you're starting to see some of the garages, Shell garages are starting to have these machines, and they're basically recycling machines. But it is part of a small little nuggets of circularity that are starting to pop up. But the difference is, it's that messaging. So, if I said, if you tell people that you've got to do this and this and this, it's not really going to happen. If it happens, evolves naturally, it's a lot more seamless, the way of doing things. So the brilliance about trading in trash or trading in plastics is quite established around the world. In many cities, what you trade, so you bring either a tin of cool drink tin or a plastic bottle, and you put it into one of these recycling machines. There's a barcode that scans, so it makes sure that it can scan whatever the aluminium tin is or the plastic. It'll spit it out if it rejects it, but if it accepts it, however many you put into it, what these cities are doing is they are swapping that for good currency. So not cash, but you can update your transport card. You can update small little things, like that, some airtime, all those kind of things. Once you put that into the equation, then it becomes an incentive to recycle. But, if you say to people, we must be kind to the planet, you must recycle, that's not a good message, because people aren't going to do that. But if they say, you can get airtime, and you can get, your bus fare or your whatever ticket with this, then that starts changing the whole conversation. And I think once you start putting those little elements in, and I'm happy to say that we're starting to see those little examples, happen around the world and even here in South Africa, then I think the rest of Africa will also start following, because it makes a lot of sense to do that.
How do we integrate the circular economy into education?
Then, you have to go to my other passion project, is tracking your Gen Zs. So I've been tracking Gen Zs. For the viewers who are not quite sure of them, they've grown older now. We started tracking them before they even came of age. They're starting to come of age now. So kind of entering puberty, 13, 14. Your oldest Gen Zs are 24, 25 already. So they are now part of your workforce. And if you thought millennials were difficult to manage and comprehend, then you've got another story coming there. But also, luckily, to answer your question, in terms of consumers and how they buy brands, is not just a blind, I'll buy something because it's nice. The social justice levels in this generation are really, really high. And you're seeing this across the board. So a lot of people say to me, well, your Gen Zs in Africa are different to the Gen Zs in developed countries. Yes and no. If they are given connectivity, just give an internet connection and a phone that can, and a platform or device that can connect, you start level the playing fields very, very quickly, because it's that access to information and education. And therein lies your education question. I don't think, again, it should be forced fed as part of a curriculum or something like that, because it is the nature of these digital natives to find groups and that they are interested in. So it's rather to form, chats and things and places where people migrate naturally, to it. And you just see, lover or hater. I call it the Marmite effect, Greta Thunberg. One schoolgirl at 16 then, sparked global protests, about climate change. So this generation is poised for that. And that's why I'm saying I don't think it needs to be nudged into education, but I don't think it needs to be force fed into it, because the awareness is already there. And even in developing or emerging markets, you'll see surprisingly that sustainability message be very, very strong in a Gen Z generation.
On the topic of rapid urbanization, do you see rapid urbanization declining over the next 10 years? And also, if we bring the future of work in here, how do you see trends in urban and rural migration playing out post-pandemic?
Yeah, so rapid urbanization, I think, is just a given. We're heading mid-century for most of the population on the planet to move towards urban areas. So the fact of planning a smart city or planning for that city of the future is really, really imperative, because you're just going to have a stress on your infrastructure, and especially if it's old, then it's going to have to be scaled exponentially to kind of do that. I think what the pandemic has done, look, the jury's still out at the moment, but it has fundamentally changed everything. So, at Flux, we call it the great real estate reshuffle. You're starting to see that a lot already about, the term semigration of migrating to a second tier city or a more affordable city, because I think fundamentally what happened in 2020 was the separation of work and place of work. So we all discovered that fundamentally it doesn't have to be the same thing. So we can do it from very different things. We're also now feeling, over a year later, that there are things about the office that we missed. The socialization, in terms of company culture, you need to have those people. So there's very hybrid models of doing things. But I think what we're starting to see, just even on the retail side of things, retail, like shopping centers and things, were always planned on a route or a hub towards work or where you work. So that is the spatial design of that is going to start fundamentally changing over the next couple of years. I don't think we're going to ever go back to, and I'm very thankful for that, a 40-hour work week that starts at 9, ends at 5, and everybody bums on seats at the same place. It's just, for decades I've been saying, why are we still doing this? It's a quaint relic of the 20th century. So now the pandemic has helped us push that forward. But I think spatially we are going to, I don't think it's going to be as radical as people say. That's going to be a sudden, the whole city is going to be redesigned. But I do think people have now started to think, so the new implementations of city structures and urban planning are going to take these things into account. And don't forget that in 2020, every single person that was in lockdown had an existential crisis, sitting at home for 9 or 10 months, thinking, do I want to do this all the time? Do I want to live here? Do I want a better place? All of those kind of things. And that slow drip, and it's going to be a continuous drip, is going to start changing the way in which we live, and then therefore the cities and how they're planned.